welcome to the 20th and final episode of this season of From The Marginlands. I'm Aarti Kumar Rao.
I'm Prem Panika, and joining Aarti in what is the final episode of 2025. More details about when we resume after towards the end of this episode. But Aarti, today's guest, the one that we have planned, it made me think of a few things that have been happening lately.
Yeah.
For instance, you remember that a Mumbai High Court, the Mumbai High Court recently permitted the chopping down of 48,000 mangrove trees
Yes.
to make way for a coastal highway, which we know how that highway works. It is only for the privileged few with cars to go from one end to the other.
And not only that, the compensation is somewhere far inland in landlocked land.
Exactly.
Mangroves to be planted or whatever.
So not only does it work for the, I mean, not only is it intended for the privileged, the underprivileged actually will suffer twice.
Yes.
Then there is the Supreme Court, which came up with what I spoke to some legal experts, including some mutual friends of ours. They all say that it's a legally flawed interpretation. But whatever it is, the ruling threatens the Aravallis, which is, as we know, among the oldest mountain ranges on Earth. Now, if these were exceptions, we'd probably say, okay, it's happened a couple of times and you need to do mitigation, etc., etc. But think about it, the RA forest, for instance, the Shivalik Hills, the Hasdeo forest, the Eastern and the Western Ghats, the Niyamagiri Hills. And more recently, we actually did a podcast on this, the Great Nicobar Project. All of them involve the exact same thing, right? The absolute destruction of forests, the decimation of our tree cover, and all of it is being done in the name of development. Not that either of us is opposed to development, but when you look at the cost versus benefit equation, it just doesn't make any kind of sense.
Yeah. And the other thing is, of course, when these forests are cleared, it's not just tree cover that is lost. There are communities that depend upon these forests. There is biodiversity associated with it. And everything starts shrinking. You know, the life in the forest starts shrinking, and then they start becoming these pockets. And the community ethos is eroded, their history, I mean, everything is tied, their identity often is tied to the land that they're on. And not only does that erode, but also the connectivity between forests, which a lot of these things that you just spoke about, which are slated to come under the axe, are vital to. All of that starts getting just cut, and then you're going to have these fragments, and it's much harder then to for various things, including to manage interactions between humans and wildlife, as well as rights, community rights, forest rights, etc. And our guest today is Raza Kazmi, who is a conservationist, is a journalist, is a historian, most importantly. And I think that part of him is what just always drew me to his work. He has studied, and continues to study the history of these forests and landscapes of central India. So Jharkhand, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, all of these places. He comes from that region. He has a storied history as well, including his father being a forester as well. So a person who comes to us with immense knowledge, immense experiential lived knowledge as well, and somebody who can interpret for us a lot of these things that are happening today, which just seems like just bad news one after another. And he's someone who reads forests and as living archives, which is just so beautiful. And even in his writings, you can see that it's always drawing upon history to try and interpret and give context to what's happening today. And so this is an essential voice for making sense of today and what we're witnessing. And without further ado, let us invite and welcome Raza Kazmi.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to this, particularly because of that point that you made. That, I mean, we tend to see forests, right, as living organisms. Some of us see it as being important to our lives and to the lives of future generations and stuff. But frankly, until I came across his work, I never thought of forests as living histories
Mm.
and as repositories of, how do you put this, historical continuity.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I'm so eager to listen to him speak about all
Yes, and the other thing, and if I forget it when we're talking to him, please remind me. Um, he is excellent with nuances of culture, folklore, words,
that. Yeah,
language, all of that, and I'd love to explore all of that with him. So let's welcome Raza.
right.
Hi, Raza. Welcome to From the Marginlands.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure entirely. Okay, so let's kick this off with just dipping back into maybe your childhood, or let's take you back to a forest, any forest you choose. Tell us a story about how forests stopped being just sightings, or stopped being, just wondrous, but started becoming a historical archive, and you started paying attention to the history, and the forest itself became a character for you.
I think going back to my childhood, I mean, the genesis for this is my childhood. I was raised in a place called Palamu, which is in Western Jharkhand. My father was in the Indian Forest Service, and he was one of those old world forest officers who spent more time in the field than at his residence. And so he loved the forest. My mother loved the forest once. I mean, she had no experience of the forest before she married my father. But after she married, she lived the first 1.5 years in a forest bungalow without any running water, no electricity. And she really loved that life. So I think because both my parents were great lovers of the forest, so it was but natural that I grew up in that environment where I was taken around the forest whenever it was possible. In fact, my earliest childhood memories are not of school or home. It is in fact of the forest. And I think the earliest that I can remember, I must have been maybe 3.5, 4 years old, and my father was out. I mean, there was a forest fire in this hillock, I remember, and my father had gone out to inspect that. The dowsing had almost been finished, but he had gone down to just have a look with the forest staff. And I was, I think, at the house, and I was making a fuss about it that I also wanted to go. My father was already a bit irritated, so he said, "Ki chalo isko bhi dal lo gaadi." So lug him into the jeep and take him with me as well. So I went, and then I remember very distinctly walking up this hillock. It was summer, and Palamu in summer is absolutely blistering hot. The temperatures go up to 50 degrees. And I was walking with, I remember one of the staff members, Bhairoji, his name was. And I was going with the forest staff. There was a big, sort of 15, 20 people, I believe. And I remember very clearly that two things. One is this burned down tree which had a hollow in it, and the hollow was burning absolutely red, like the embers were still burning red like the sun, and I found it very fascinating. I remember as a kid, and then there were a couple of close calls that way. One was that suddenly, while I was at the base of the hillock, a huge rock rolled off from the top, and it came at such speed that nobody could do anything pretty much about it. And my father, he still sort of, is traumatized by that because he thought that it would crush me. And I remember suddenly hearing a rumble from the hillock and then looking up, and this huge boulder hurtling down at me, and it just missed me by maybe 2 feet. And nobody could have done anything about it. Had it been 2 feet on this side, I would have been gone. So that was one that happened, and the other was that I was in those days you didn't think too much about um, water and this and that and carrying provisions. So it was hot and everybody was tired. So by the end of it, we wanted to drink some water. So there was no source of water. So there was basically a small water hole that was used by animals and people alike. So what you used to do was that in this stagnant water pool, you would go and dig in the sand next to the pool, and the water would percolate through it, and then you would drink through it. In our area, it is called chua. So chua banaya gaya. I remember making the chua and then drinking out of it, and I was very happy. But unfortunately, after that, I had the worst runs of all time, I think. So my mother was pretty angry about it. कि लड़के को दे दिया तो तुम तो मतलब मार ही डालोगे टाइप्स but it was all good fun. So I that was the kind of childhood I had. I spent, once I started schooling, all the weekends, any days that were off, or even in the evenings, we would just, my father was usually camping in some forest bungalow or the other. So we would go and join him. And my father used to take us around as much as he could. And um, I think, and hats off to both my parents, that I was, and I say this often, that I was never raised as a quote unquote Sahab's kid. I was always raised as a very normal, in the sense, child, like any other household. And in fact, my father encouraged me to spend more time with the forest staff. If we were passing through some village, to go spend time with, at the village. Um, my all my friends were, members of the forest staff, the children of the forest staff, and so I used to spend a lot of time with, staying at the place of, say, one of our house helps who I was very close to, Lallu. So his wife, I used to call her Mai, and I used to eat at her place. I used to eat, maar bhat, that is starch and starch rice, and with some chutney. And that was the first time I saw how she used to make what we would call Indian popcorns. So how you fry those. So all of that. So that was the kind of childhood I had. And how it delved into history, now that I look back at it, is because in our area, unfortunately, even in those days, I mean, it's much worse now, but even back in the day, wildlife was very, you didn't see too much of wildlife. You saw some animals here and there and whatever, but you heard a lot of stories. So whenever I was sitting with, say, some villager or some old forest staff member or a daily waste tracker, and they would also very happy to have a little kid around, asking questions. So they would tell me, "Arey bhaiya," or "Arey babu." That is how they address children in our area. So, "Arey babu." पूरा पहले के ज़माने में ऐसा होता था, पहले यहाँ इतना बाघ था, earlier there used to be, these many tigers and this animal and that animal, and I saw this and this happened. So I used to be very fascinated, because I found that, uh, because of the fact that I did not get to see things myself, but I vicariously lived what it must have been like, or what wild, the wilderness must have been like, and in its heydays, through these stories. Um, and that oral history, that oral narrative, sort of was something that stayed with me. Much later, when I was in college, that is when I started. I remember I was very fascinated by cheetahs, because, again, one of those things. I mean, I guess I was a kid who was into nostalgia ever since I can remember. So cheetah was something that really attracted me, and so I remember reading Divya Singh Saab's kitab, The End of Trail, the Oxford version that used to come back in the day. Um, and I was very intrigued and hooked by it. Two things: I was very hooked and intrigued by it because I thought, apart from the oral history and the narrative history that I've heard all this while, here is another way of knowing what was there in the day, back in the day, and that is through books. So that was one. The other was that I also found that even there, I found that Jharkhand was underrepresented in that narrative as well, and that was a grouse that I always had. I always, as growing up as a teenager, I used to read Sanctuary magazine, yeah, whatever XYZ newspaper. And I used to find articles about wildlife from Corbett or Ranthambore or Bandipur, all these well-known places, but I would never find anything written about places where I grew up in Jharkhand. So when I read Divanu Singh Saab's kitab, I was like, oh, there must be more about Jharkhand and what was there in Jharkhand. So let me just look for what was the distribution of cheetahs in Jharkhand and try and research. And then I went into reading all these books. I was in Bhopal in those days. So I went to the state archives and just, basically doing whatever little historical investigation I could. And I
How old were
found
you at this
I
time?
I I would have been this was 2020, so I would have been about 20.
Hmm.
Um, so this was 2010. This was 2010, so I would have been about 20. And that eventually led to a small monograph that was published called uh, "The Last Hunting Leopards of Jharkhand," if I remember correctly. And that is in a way that was and that yielded about 5 or 7, 8 new references to cheetah presence in Jharkhand that wasn't recorded in Divanu Singh's kitab.
Mm.
So I think that in a way started my journey into wildlife history from a more academic sort of pursuit, if you would call that.
Did you say Last Hunting Leopards of Jharkhand?
Yes, the last
So,
hunting leopard of Jharkhand. It was published by Zoosprint.
so were the cheetahs called hunting leopards?
Yes.
Oh, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, because cheetahs were basically there's a lot of confusion that happens when you look into the history of cheetahs, because back in the day, in Hindi especially, most of the people used to refer to leopards and cheetahs as cheetah.
Cheetah, huh?
Which basically means spotted, comes from the Sanskrit chitraka.
Hmm.
So when the Britishers came in, and there is a huge confusion over what is the correct nomenclature. They earlier said that what is known as the leopard should actually be the cheetah should be called a leopard because it is a pard. It has raised hair at the back, and the cheetah also has raised hair at the back. So what we call leopard should be called. I mean, I get confused. What is cheetah should be known as a leopard, and what is known as a leopard should be known as a panther. And there was much debate about that, and so that whole khichdi basically caused a lot of confusion even in the early British naturalists. But one thing that they did was that because cheetahs were used as coursing animals, and this goes down back into the early medieval era, at least that we know of. There are records from early medieval era of coursing cheetahs in India, first in early medieval era texts, and then you find that the Mughals and the Delhi Sultanate and others adopted that
Sorry,
sport. And
I'm going to take you just when you say early medieval. Can you situate that? What timestamp
this
would that
would
be?
be, I think it's the 11th century, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
I always get the pronunciation wrong. Uh, Malanosa, or I mean, I forget the exact text but it's that is the earliest textual reference to coursing with cheetahs.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it's 11th, 12th century, if I remember correctly. And then so 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 the sport of, or quote unquote sport, if you would call it, of hunting black bucks and sometimes other animals, especially black buck with cheetahs, was a huge thing among Indian nobility by the time the Britishers gained control in India. So, and this was something that the Britishers found a way, sort of oddity, so they were quite keen on witnessing at least these hunts. And so what they did was that cheetahs, because they were used to hunt these animals, captive animals, so they called them hunting leopards, and that
mm.
is how the name hunting leopard came in. That that is also, it helps when you're looking into the history of cheetahs, that if there is a British writing that mentions the term hunting leopard, then you can be sure that they're talking of the cheetah, and there isn't a confusion, or they aren't mixing it up with leopards.
It's fascinating. Fascinating. I can take him down this whole rabbit hole, Prem. I'm going to bring it back to you, and please ask him other questions. Otherwise, we can just keep going down this one
No,
rabbit hole.
I was just thinking when you say 11th century, it is not even like, I mean, that was a time, if you're talking of North India, that was a time when you didn't even have a single big recognizable dynasty. I think you had, uh, I don't know, the Gurjaras, you had the Chalukyas were slowly developing, but even the Rajputs, they were the early Rajputs at that period, if my
Yes,
history is not completely.
but this text, if I remember correctly, was by Manasolasa, I think it's called. It was by Someshwar III. So that would be this is uh, Kalyani Chalukya, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yeah,
this is, I think, around the 12th century.
right,
So they were the ones, the Chalukyas, the Kalyani Chalukyas were the first one who, at least that we know of, give evidence of coursing being, cheetah coursing being prevalent.
right.
Though, if you look at the records of the Magad Empire, so the Greek travelers who came to Magad during those times, Pliny and so on and so
Hmm.
forth, Megasthenes and so on. Even they mention captive, what they call captive pards, or which basically we are very sure were cheetahs, being present at the courts of the Mauryas. But were they using them to course, or were they just using them as animals to display the power of the king? That we are not sure. But with the Manasolasa, we know that it was being used for coursing.
One of the things I wanted to, sorry, Arti, did you?
I
No,
was just going to ask why the cheetah and not, I mean, why the cheetah over other animals to be used as a coursing?
It's easy to tame, first of all.
Hmm.
And even today, you would see that, I mean, in Africa, all these photos that come of cheetahs just jumping onto these vehicles and, sniffing around, and they are generally very tame and, dare I say, at least when it comes to humans, timid.
Hmm.
So, for instance, there is absolutely zero historical record of a cheetah killing a human being deliberately. There is one record of somebody getting scratched by it, or injured by it, and then dying of his injuries, which is accidental.
Hmm.
But unlike a leopard or a lion or a tiger, you don't have any records of them hunting down a person or killing a person.
right.
Um, so they were very easy to tame, and when it comes to taming, it was very interesting that both cubs and even adults could be tamed. So then that was what I think what led to them being used for coursing, and of course the speed. But so that is there as well. I do know that they did try, some of the kings and nobles did try with tigers and leopards to see if it would work, but it never worked.
Hmm.
Right. Raza, when we talk about, you know, depleting forests and things like that, or when we go back into the past, and I think all of us have had this experience. You talk to locals and they talk about how us zamane mein there was this animal or that animal in this region that is no longer there, etc. So somehow the history of a forest seems to be all about the animals that have been lost. But from your work, there is a lot more, right? I mean, there are sociological losses. There is loss of lifestyles, of cultures. Uh, there's so much more. So I was trying to, I think what I'm trying to get at is, would it be possible for you to give us all, particularly the listeners, a sense of what a forest's role is in the historical landscape of a country? Take any forest you like.
Ah,
How does history build?
in multiple ways, I guess. Now that you asked me this question, I'm just thinking as I speak. It it plays a key role in history, or it builds history in multiple ways. It could be it could be it is it has played a role in the political history of many landscapes. For instance, if I was to just pick up the history of, say, Jharkhand, the genesis of the state of Jharkhand and the movement for the state of Jharkhand has its roots in the way the forests were being managed in that area. The name itself, Jharkhand, means Jhar, basically forest, trees, and Khand, parcel of land. So the parcel of land that is covered with trees and forests. So they play a huge role in the politics of the people and the community. If you go back to what was happening during when the first Britishers came into what is now Chota Nagpur Plateau, Jharkhand, the kind of hostility they had to face, the kind of call it rebellion, call it fight for independence, whatever you would. Basically, the kind of, or as history puts it, the kind of revolt they had to face, all of them were centered around, in some way or the other, the forest and the access to forest and the resource use of those forests, and also those forests as cultural and spiritual homes for the Adivasis. So for the Adivasis, in today, that sentiment might have diluted in some ways, but it's still there. But back in the day, it was as much a spiritual and cultural space as much as it had its utilitarian value. So an assault on the forest, and when I say assault, it could be just reserving forest or cutting down forest for silviculture, the scientific management, as quote unquote scientific management, as the Butcher used to call it. Whatever way you look at it, that assault on the forest was not just seen as an assault on a way of life or a livelihood. It was also seen as an assault on their ancestral homes, on their spirits of their ancestors, and so on and so forth. And that was a far more or far bigger provocation in some ways than just a loss of a source of livelihood for the Adivasis in these areas, which then led to eventually revolts and this and that. So it has played its role in political history. Then if you look at the forest from just a sense of, as I said, I mean, it flows from the earlier point, cultural space or a spiritual place for the Adivasis. Their entire worldview, cosmos, how they live their life, which festivals to celebrate, what rituals to follow when somebody is born, when somebody is married, when somebody dies, all the big markers of a human's lifetime. Everything involves the forest, hunting, just propitiating the gods. All of them, even if you had to propitiate a god, the medium would in many cases be a particular tree or a particular plant, or so on and so forth. So the names that would be given to people, the language that they spoke, I mean, even if it was not written, the oral traditions and just the language of a particular people, that was heavily influenced by the forest and the natural spaces around. So in that sense as well, and that is why I always and animals played their part as well. They were hunted, and I mean, the hunting eventually did catch up on the numbers as the forest retreated and the people increased and so on and so forth. Beyond hunting, there was a deep-rooted spiritual and cultural bond with these animals, even with the animals that they used to hunt. And then you had totem animals. A lot of the surnames that you see in Adivasi areas of Jharkhand, they are derived from wild animals. Lakada, for instance, means leopard. That is a very common surname. Kachhap different from Kashyap, that is in among mainstream Hindus. Kachap basically comes from Kachua. Um, Very interesting. There is a surname that is Kerketta, which basically means the entrails of a wild pig. And there is I mean, I can go on and on with many, and these are all from various totem animals. Um,
Please go
so
on.
uh,
Please go on. Give one to
uh,
more. Tell me, how does entrails of a wild pig, Kerketa, become somebody's last name?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure in the sense that I don't remember the exact story. These have all been documented. They have been fascinating. I mean, if somebody is interested, I would highly recommend reading books by S.C. Roy, who was a very well-known anthropologist who worked in that area. S.C. Roy. Then there was the works of people like Archer, who have worked among the Santals. There was uh, Surennath Mitra, if I remember correctly. He has done a lot of work. You find a lot of. I mean, there are 32 Adivasi groups, what we call scheduled tribes now. 32 notified scheduled tribes in Jharkhand, and these are all all of them have their own unique uh, cultural practices, totem animals, so on and so forth, surnames, and so all of these, I mean, if you go into the depth of these anthropological works, you'll find basically stories of how each totem animal, how each surname, what is the origin story of that surname. I'm forgetting the exact. I'm forgetting the exact surname. I remember the story, but I'm forgetting which the surname for it. But for that particular, it came from a particular wine, and the story basically went that there was an old, I mean, for that particular clan, that Adivasi, he had gone out of the village, and um, had lost his way, and then he was tired, and then he was cold, and then he eventually rested below a tree, and then he was sort of about to get hypothermia. He was shivering in the cold, and then this particular wine, it basically wrapped him in a cocoon to warm him up and save him. And when he survived, he said that, and from now on, everybody from my clan will worship you and will be named in your honor. And so that is how that particular clan got its surname. So in that sense, every surname has a particular story. So yeah, so in that way, forests and wildlife have a role to play, and that is why I always say that in especially in our areas, the loss of forests and also especially wildlife, it is not just a loss of a biological loss. It is a cultural loss as well, because the folklores that were based around these animals, they go out. The names that of these animals, once they go extinct, the newer generation, because they don't encounter those animals anymore, those names lose their relevance, and eventually they're forgotten. And eventually it may so happen in future that you can, maybe the animals might come back in those areas, either naturally or through reintroduction or this or that, but you cannot bring back that culture that is lost. So I mean, there is, in many ways, I strongly believe that as much as there is a case to be made from purely biological and ecological point of view for saving wildlife, there is an equally strong case to be made for saving wildlife from a cultural point of view as well. Whether you are interested in saving languages, folklore, particular cultural ethos, even in those, I mean, even if you don't really care much about the ecological aspect of it, even if you are more interested in these aspects, even then, wildlife has a very critical role to play.
This Aarti was right. Every time you talk, it's a rabbit hole, and it's very hard to resist the temptation to dive into it. You mentioned the Adivasis and how they saw certain animals as totems, right? I was wondering, and this question also stems from things that I've heard in my childhood from my grandparents and people like that. When that happens, when a particular animal is seen as a totem, what rules does that create? For instance, is there prohibitions on hunting? Would be one of them, I guess. There would be marriage taboos. I remember vaguely hearing about that. Ritual obligations, for instance, certain things that you're supposed to do, certain things you're not supposed to do. Uh, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and also other stories about where animals judge humans. I was picking up from that story that you just gave us about animals protecting humans, where animals judge humans, withdraw these protections. Do you have that kind of
Yeah,
folklore as well?
yeah, absolutely. So there are many. So I mean, if I were to come to the first part of your question, while the rules and regulations about totem animals differs from in among different Adivasi groups, different tribes, you could say just a general thumb rule that is usually followed, or that is usually true for in most cases, is that a totem animal usually will not be hunted. But how I mean, if you were to speak from a conservation perspective, it does not make too much of a difference, because what happens is that, say for instance, there is a village, and within the village, let's say it's dominated by one particular tribe, but within that tribe there might be maybe people who follow four different totem animals. So let's assume one of them is a lakda. So the clan that follows who have lakda, the leopard, as the totem animal, they will not hunt it. But then the rest of the three members, or the three other clans in the same village, who don't follow, who don't have the leopard as the totem animal, they will go and hunt it. So it does not necessarily lead to conservation, because the people are so mixed. It isn't a monolith. A village won't have a single clan. It usually is a mixture of different clans. But the usual rule is that the clan that worships a particular totem animal will not hunt it. But there are innovations there as well. In cases, for instance, let us assume that a leopard becomes a man eater, and then that is a problem. So then you have special
Dispensation.
rituals to be performed to basically take permission from the forest spirits to go and hunt this particular problematic animal, even though it is your totem animal. So there are innovations that are made when it is needed. But generally they won't hunt. And then, of course, as you said, when it comes to the totem will have a role in who you marry. Usually people with different totems will not intermarry. I mean, those rules have largely, I mean, it is changing rapidly. But back in the day, when things were more conservative and traditional in these matters, they wouldn't intermarry among different clans which had different totems. There might, even in some cases, in some places, there might be restrictions on dining with the other person who has a different totem. So there are all sorts of permutation and combination that would happen, but the two primary totem related aspects would be that you wouldn't hunt your totem animal, and you usually wouldn't marry in a clan with a different totem animal. You would usually marry within your clan which had the same totem.
Wow.
And
Partly,
oh, sorry. And the second part of your question, which was about animals judging, that is a very common theme that you'd find especially in areas where man eating was a problem, by tigers was a problem, and that was pretty much all over central India and northern India, but especially central India. And there you would see, the tiger was, for instance, among the Bega Adivasis and the Gonda Adivasis. Um, the Begas would see tiger, and the Gonds, both of them see they have a tiger god by the name of Bagheswar, who basically is a disciplining god. And the role of that disciplining god is that if you break particular clan rules or tribe rules, or if you break those rules, or you make certain promises and you don't keep them, the tiger, the Baghesur, will send the tiger as its enforcer, let us call it, and he will punish you for your indiscretions, and that is usually so. People who would be killed by tigers, and if there was a particular case of man eating happening, all of that would be um, theologically justified or understood as being sort of karmic punishment for people, those victims having done some indiscretion that for which they were punished by this judging god that was Bagesur. And but even then it was very interesting, because a lot of these Adivasis believe that it was, though he judged and though he would mete you out this punishment of death, it was a painless death, because they believe that when the shadow of the tiger befalls the would-be victim, the person would become stupefied, and he would become stupefied, and the shadow of the tiger would almost act as a anesthesia. So where the person would be killed, but he would feel no pain, because he was under the shadow of the tiger, and thus his body couldn't feel any pain.
Ati,
Fascinating.
I'll keep going on this
No, we
track
both
forever.
keep going on. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God, where do we?
Yeah, over to you.
So, okay, one question, Raza, when you keep talking about forests and you were answering Prem's question about the forest having a cultural and a spiritual angle in shaping what Jharkhand is and, has become, etc. I had a question which kind of is taking us maybe a few steps back, and to ask you, what does the forest in Jharkhand look like? Not necessarily today. I'm not saying, with all the deforestation, blah, 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 not that way. But what is forest to a person, to these Adivasis? What does it have to be trees? Can it be grasslands? Can it be a hillock? Can it be a wild space? What is a forest for a person? And also over time, given the different dispensations of forestry and silviculture, like you brought up silviculture as well, how has the nature of forest changed? And then does that then influence or change the spiritual and cultural aspects of what a forest is in Jharkhand? I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm making sense. It's all
No, no,
inside here right now, but yeah.
no, it does make sense. So, as you very correctly defined, it could mean anything. I mean, generally, because Jharkhand, as in ecologically, the Chota Nagpur Plateau is a forested landscape. So you don't usually get grasslands or large wetlands or so on and so forth. There are few here and there, but it isn't a natural, a dominant natural feature. The dominant natural feature is sal-dominated forest. In some patches in some patches in the plateaus of southern Chota Nagpur, close to south of Palamu, there you do have, or you used to have, short grasslands, which were then very quickly brought under cultivation. So for the longest time they've been under cultivation, or they're they aren't wild spaces in the traditional sense of the word. But other than that, in terms of just a forest as a spiritual entity, it could be a wild river, it could be a pond in the forest, it could be just the forest, it could be a waterfall, it could be, I mean, there are many stories about, I am privy to, and I am sure I know very little, but whatever little I know, I am privy to stories around the spirituality of each of these features: rivers, waterfalls, forests, hillocks, hills, caves. So, I mean, all the natural features that you can think of, there is a possibility that, it could be a sacred space to people. Now, the question, however, that you asked about what happens when say the Britishers came in and changed the the way the forest was managed, and they changed the basic structure of the forest in many ways through silviculture. That is a very interesting question because again, that question or that action is what basically led to the birth of Jharkhand and a huge violent movement at the time around it. I mean, it was non-violent to begin with, and then it went into violence as well. Just to give you a small rundown of what basically happened was, so in silviculture, you would know that the forest is basically harvested for timber, and because the forest is supposed to be harvested for timber, the entire thrust of the forestry is to maximize the crop of commercially valuable timber and minimize other floristic species which might not have commercial use. So I always say that a lot of the forests that we see and celebrate, they aren't what they originally were. These are forests that were heavily silviculturally managed and changed by the Britishers, and what we see today is a legacy of that change rather than the original forest. So when you often hear that euphemism, Saranda being the largest, Asia's largest sal forest, and so on and so forth, but a huge portion of Saranda division was very heavily managed by the Britishers to turn it into almost a monoculture of sal, to eliminate all the other mixed species and just have pure sal crops. So this whole, I mean, it was a sal dominated forest, but the way you'll see just patch after patch of almost 90% sal. That is because of the silviculture operation that were done over a period of almost a century. Um, so so that changes the of course the look of the forest and how the people relate to it. But what the next step that happened was that sal was a commercially important timber species, but even more important or even more commercially valuable than sal was teak, or sagwan as it is known in our area. So you would know that a lot of North Indian and Central Indian forests have big patches of teak which were brought in by the Britishers and planted there for harvesting. It so happened that in around the 1960s, um, the forest department in Saranda and Singhbhum, basically, it started cutting down sal forest and putting teak in its place. And that was a huge no-no for the Adivasis because sal is sacred to them, teak is an alien species to them. So then they protested against this change in the look of the forest and bringing in this alien tree species and hacking down of sal, and that eventually led to a conflagration, and it's a long story, but basically that birth, there was violence around it. I mean, Adivasis were fired upon by the police at one point, and I mean the forest department went out of the picture very quickly because once the what happened was that some forest officers and range officers at sector forest staff were basically held were hostage for a while. Some of the range officers and forest rest houses were ransacked. And when that happened, the forest department basically put their hands up, this is beyond our pay grade and control. So the police took control of those areas, and then it became a conflict between the police and the Adivasis. And when that happened, then eventually Hemant Soren's party, the version of it, Jharkhand Party, and then it later became JMM, Jharkhand Mukti Morcha. They all jumped in, and then that entire movement took basically political turn of that the Bihar government that controls, these are all people of the plains, these are outsiders, they don't understand Adivasi people, they don't understand the forest, they don't understand the culture, and they're sitting in Patna and making these decisions about our lives. So we need to have a separate state of our own. And eventually it took 20-30 years. That it eventually led to the birth of Jharkhand in 2000. So the in many ways the spark that lit the fire that led to the birth of Jharkhand. It happened because the forest department had tried planting teak instead of sal.
I was just thinking while listening to you, everything that you're talking about, when animals, for instance, are seen as ancestors, forests are repositories of memory, and stories become law. I was thinking, what do we erase when we clear a forest? Normally, you think, okay, lots of trees have been chopped down, but you're actually erasing much more than that, right? I mean, you're erasing an entire sort of a historical era, for instance.
Yeah, yeah. You're erasing history, you're erasing culture, you're erasing um, memory, you're erasing language, you're erasing, of course, you're erasing the forest itself. But yeah, the loss is much more than just a
Tree,
biological loss.
right? Are they?
Aarti, you're on mute, I guess.
Sorry. Thank you. Um, so when you talked about the sal being sacred and teak being introduced, my first trivial question was, where did teak come from that the British brought in teak? One, but second, when you talked about the birth of Jharkhand as almost like a once a protest, but some kind of pushback against Patna, has the birth of Jharkhand then changed anything in that sense for the Adivasis?
So, teak occurs naturally, so it was brought in basically from
Burma?
southern India. No,
Exactly.
it was. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it was CPT, that is Central Provinces. CP is Central Provinces. Burma teak is famous, and that was considered the superior grade of teak. But there was equally famous CP teak, that is the Central Provinces teak. So if you ever drive down from say Kanha to Pech, you will see that a particular range of hills that is sort of the dividing line between the teak and the sal forest of India. So I've crossed this ridge, and it's very fascinating. You go up one side of the ridge and it's all sal, then you reach the ridge and the tree line sort of it is a bit confused, and then you go down on the other side and the sal completely disappears, and then it's just teak, and then the teak forest begins. So Betul, Chhindwara, that landscape, Balaghat, that is the dividing line between the teak and the sal belt of India. So everything north of it has a lot of sal. There are patches where there is no sal, but generally speaking, and everything south of it has a lot of teak. Say except for maybe the Western Ghats and so on and so forth, but the deciduous forests. Um, so because it was happening post independence, this was CP teak that was being introduced in that area. If you ever go on train from southern India towards northern India, you usually cross these stations called Ballarsha and all that area. These were huge teak depots, timber stations. Um, and the second question about have things really changed? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people might differ with me on this. And maybe in some ways even I'm an outsider to answer this question because I'm not an Adivasi. But in my view, theoretically, I'm not sure much has changed. But if you were to speak, you know, come from a sentimental point of view or emotional point of view, then maybe yes, that there is that sense of pride or accomplishment that we come from the state among the Adivasis, that we have a state of our own. Um, Even though, if I'm not mistaken, the state was, I mean, the Jharkhand has been created such that it isn't a tribal majority state. Very interestingly, if you go into the history of the Jharkhand movement, when the concept of Jharkhand was conceptualized by Jaipal Singh Munda, he wanted a tribal majority state where the tribals were in voting majority. And so he had the geography that he had thought of was basically all of Chota Nagpur, northern Odisha, northern Chhattisgarh, and parts of Western West Bengal. So when you bring that entire state together, or that entire geography together, then you have the tribals in majority. But the states were so created, be it Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, that none of these states had a tribal majority. Um, so but nonetheless, there is that sense of accomplishment that we got a state for ourselves, or that was at least carved out on the question of our rights and our identity. Um, but beyond that, has have things materially gotten better, as they should have, for a state that was born out of this ideal of tribal asmita, tribal pride, tribal identity? I would say no.
Prem?
Yeah, I'm trying to, among all of the things that we've spoken about so far, I'm trying to resist the temptation to just keep going deeper and deeper, because there's also width to this whole conversation. We need it for half a day or something.
I was
Uh,
thinking a week.
yeah,
Anyway. So, Raza, I mean, we've talked about this several times and I've aborted it. Remember, I've talked about coming to Hazaribagh, meeting you there in the field, etc. So finally, this February, when we finally set out, Prem and I set out on a road trip, and we started through Jharkhand, we went through Dhanbad, etc. But I was telling him I want to go to Hazaribagh, but I think I pinged you and you weren't there or something like that. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, then, there's no point going to Hazaribagh without Raza being there, or Mihir being there. So, anyways, but I'm just going to, while Prem thinks of the next one, I just want to bring you back to the cheetah, which is interesting to me, because when you say that central India is largely was forested as forests, right? As sal forests or whatever. Forests being tree cover forests. We don't normally think of a cheetah as being a forest creature, right? And that's the African cheetah that we have in our mind. We don't have a sense of what kind of creature the Asiatic cheetah was. Can you take us back to the life of the Asiatic cheetah, maybe not as a coursing animal, but as a truly
But
wild creature, and how it would have lived in this landscape?
so I mean, as I said, generally central India is forested, but of course there were large patches which were what you would call, or what today is called, the open natural ecosystem.
Right.
So if you look at parts of Siuni, and I've driven through almost all of these landscapes, and you look at these places and you're like, yeah, this, I mean, this looks, I mean, why wouldn't a cheetah occur here? So if you look at basically northwestern Madhya Pradesh, that is Gwalior,
Hmm.
Shivpuri,
Hmm.
all that Great Indian Bustard
Hmm.
Belt.
Hmm.
If you look at parts of Burhanpur, Siuni, all of these have large short grassland, rocky outcrops, that sort of landscape. Then Deccan, which is again
Hmm.
a hub of short grasslands and open natural ecosystem, right from Maharashtra going into Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. Um, these were these were the strongholds of the cheetah as well. Um,
Wow, how
so
far
unless,
south did the cheetah occur?
the southernmost record of them occurring is Tirunelveli. I'm sure I
You're kidding
yeah,
me.
yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
so
So right
going
down the
up to,
middle of the Deccan, probably, no?
yes, yes,
Mm.
yes, yes. And their ecology, it was, there are two things to remember. First is that one has to remember, and there is often this question that is raised by the skeptics, ki, oh, if there were so many cheetahs, or you have tigers, there are X number of tigers that were killed by the Britishers, and you have Y number of leopards that were killed by the Britishers. So where are the cheetahs? Why were they not killed in those numbers if there were so many? There are two ways to look at it. One is that for any species, you would see, and this is an ecological phenomena, that at the fringes of their distribution range, they always occur in lower densities compared to the places which is in the heart of their distribution range. So for tigers, India is part of the heart of their historic distribution range. For cheetahs, it is the easternmost limit of their distribution range. Um, so they naturally would not be found in the densities in Indian subcontinent that you would say find in Africa. Um, so that was one. The other was that so the numbers were not comparable to what you would find in Africa. The other was that by the time the British came in, the cheetahs, much like the lions, they were both of them were already on their way out.
Mm.
And I've recently done a study on the history of elephants in central India. In Madhya Pradesh, I mean, you wouldn't associate Gujarat with elephant, but Jahangir captured 266 elephants in Gujarat and Maharashtra, not the border areas. So in a 3 month period. Or you wouldn't associate Kuno, for instance, with elephants, and Akbar captured about 150 elephants there in 1564. What I'm getting at is that a lot of these landscapes have also changed, historically, but also capturing of animals has played a huge role in uh, causing extinctions even when the habitat was still available.
Mm.
And that is the same thing that happened with the cheetah. So the cheetah had a wide distribution range, but it was because of the sport of coursing becoming such a huge fashion, for a lack of better word,
Mm.
that they were just captured to extinction in most places.
Mm.
And when you look at the ecology of the Asiatic cheetah, it wasn't that traditional image of huge open savannas of Africa and just cheetah just running and running and running. A very good microcosm of what the habitat of cheetahs in India would be the extant habitat of cheetahs of Iran, which is the same subspecies, Asiatic cheetahs. There, the cheetahs in Iran as well, they are more of an ambush predator than they are a sort of chase predator. So they're found in barren, rocky, or at least visually barren, rocky landscapes, where there'll be, and dry landscapes, and they will just be waiting for the right moment to pounce upon animals that are coming to graze there. They'll hang around water holes, they'll hang around particular rocky outcrops that give a good vantage view, and then they'll spot the prey animal and dash towards it. So short sprints. And in India, a very interesting record of the kind of cheetahs we found and ecology of cheetahs come from Mughal records.
Mm.
Because the Mughals, because they were capturing them in such large numbers, they also left behind accounts of, one was how they were captured, what were the different methods of capturing. So how pit method, so or a cap, there are other methods that were followed by the Adivasis. It was such a big industry in a way that I talked of Adivasis having various clans. The Pardhi Adivasis, they had a separate clan that was known as the Cheetahwala Pardhi.
Mm.
Their only job, Pardhis are by, historically they have been hunter-gatherer tribe, but they specialized in capturing animals. So birds, this particular clan specialized in just capturing cheetahs. So, so they had their own methods of capturing cheetahs. Um, uh, Moreover, the Mughals also leave behind records of, uh, you know, types of cheetahs found. So they will say that there is a Multani cheetah, there is a Saurashtra cheetah, there are cheetahs they're found even what is now Afghanistan. So Afghani cheetahs, there were cheetahs that were found in Deccan, and they would give certain, morphological differences between them. For instance, the cheetahs of course, Multan, Afghanistan were supposed to be more stockier compared to, say, a Gujarati cheetah, which was leaner because it spent more time in the heat. The Deccani cheetahs had their different features, and so on and so forth. So there's a rich repository of basic cheetah ecology that you can find in various Persian treatises that were written during the broad Mughal era. Um, So that was it. And then when by the time the Britishers came in, these cheetahs were already on their way out. They were surviving in areas where primarily they hadn't been uh, captured to extinction, but in low densities. And then eventually, when the Britishers came in and they hunted a few, it wasn't much. It was primarily that they had already gone into that what we ecologically call that extinction vortex. That they were naturally dying out. The natural regeneration rates weren't enough um, to change the destiny of the species. What it needed was specific conservation measures that has been done for tigers or other animals, and those weren't the days of conservation. So they just generally went extinct. So the last cheetah that you will find them in random places like the edges of sal forest and so on and so forth, which aren't ideal cheetah habitats because they had been hunted to or captured to extinction in their ideal habitats, and the last stragglers were left in areas which were right at the edge of the forest where they were somehow eking out a living, so to speak, and then eventually they died out from there as well.
And that was when?
The last ones that were hunted was that we have physical evidence for was December 1947. So just as India gained independence, cheetahs went extinct. And the last alleged sighting is 1970.
And that's not of a wild one, that's of a coursing cheetah?
No, these are all wild ones.
All wild, okay.
Wild ones.
And where was it seen?
Coursing,
last in
I'm
the
not
wild?
counting because coursing, I'm not counting coursing cheetahs because with coursing cheetahs, I mean, once they're coursing, there seems to be wild cheetahs.
That's
This
right.
is just about wild cheetahs.
So the 1970 wild cheetah spot sighting was where?
In Hazaribagh.
Oh.
And Hazaribagh had a history of cheetahs, which was again something that I happened to find when I was doing this work on cheetahs of Jharkhand that I talked about earlier in our discussion. Cheetahs were known; they were called Son cheetah in that area, according to the old British records. And then so they were recorded up till the 1880s, 90s, and then we don't know what was the situation between 1900 to 1960, 70, and then 1970 is the last alleged sighting of that animal. And there were quite a few cheetahs that were hunted in or shot in what is now Jharkhand. They were shot in Deoghar, which is just east of Hazaribagh. There is a book called 30 Years of Shikar by Braddon. He has detailed accounts of that of shooting in that area. They were shot in Palamu, in the larger Palamu landscape, not in the forest, but parts of Palamu has open landscapes as well. So in
This
Palamu,
Devgarh is close to the Rajmahal Devgarh, same one?
no, this is Deoghar. Deoghar this is just east of Hazaribagh, south of Bhagalpur, Munger. That area.
Wohi. It has an
It's
airport or something, no?
Yeah, it has an airport and
Right.
has a very famous mandir. It has
Correct.
a Rajrata
Same one.
temple.
Yeah. Sorry, before I pass this on to baton on to Prem again, I just wanted to ask. It just struck me, Hazari Bagh. Did that have anything to do with Hazar and Bagh?
It depends on who you ask. So the more romantic story is of course that there were 1,000 tigers in that landscape, and so it was known as Zariba. But the truth of the matter is that, as the Britishers would put it, there were two villages, Okni and Hazari, I think, and there was a huge mango orchard, or orchard of mango or other trees. I'm not sure. I don't remember correctly. But when the Britishers first established that area as a cantonment town, because of the orchards and the village of Hazari, the Bagh,
Oh,
the Bagh of Hazari, so
got it, got
it,
it.
it
So
became
this is
Hazari
the
Bagh,
garden wala Bagh.
the Garden Wala Bagh. But then, of course, there were lots of tigers in that area. So then, I mean, this second meaning also took its root in that time period itself. Then a lot of people also started calling it the town of 1,000 tigers because there were so many tigers around. Of
Interesting.
course, now you neither have the gardens nor the tigers, just the town.
Frame over to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, while Raza was talking, I was thinking if, like he said, if the cheetah's decline began with the, you know, institutionalized capture for royal displays and for hunting and things like that centuries ago. I was wondering if we can see echoes of that same logic today in the zoos, both private and public, reintroduction projects, conservation branding, all of those things. Just a passing thought. But Raza, you talked about the numbers and how the decline in numbers tells a story, uh, goes into history to look into why these numbers decline. Uh, in conservation circles, numbers are very seductive in that, you know, we keep getting a sense of progress. For instance, oh, so many tigers this year, and it has grown by 2% or 5% or whatever it is. What is it that gets lost when we reduce complex ecological realities to just a population census?
I think it's a huge problem. For me, I mean, of course, we have done well in certain states, but if you look at the overall picture of tigers or most animals in India, there have been huge losses in particular landscapes and huge gains, I would say, in very localized landscapes. So, for instance, um, I was listening to Ulas Karan the other day, and I've read his book as well. He estimates that maybe there were, the Western Ghats landscape might not have had maybe 100 tigers when he was a young boy in the 1960s, and now it has, I don't know, maybe 400, 500 tigers. Madhya Pradesh might not have had, what is now Madhya Pradesh might not have had maybe 200 tigers or 150 tigers in 1960, 70, and now it has close to 700 or something. So there are these states or particular landscape that have done very well. But then if you look at the overall occupation range of tigers, and I think that is what matters, because numbers is okay. I mean, of course, I wouldn't take credit away from the managers who have, and even communities in areas where they have managed to not just sustain tiger numbers but actually increase them. But the actual success of conservation of a species, in my view, lies in what the occupational trends tell you. And for tigers, much like most other wildlife in India, the occupation range has been under a constant decline. So, for instance, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, take out Simlipal, take out Amrabad and Nagarjuna Srisalam. And apart from that, in all these states, you have pretty much no tigers at all. Go to Northeast India, take off Kaziranga, Manas, and Oran, and you are left with no tigers pretty much in all of Northeast India. So, um, and these are all landscape that had huge tiger numbers right up till the turn of the 20th century. I mean, as they say, crying out loud, Sarguja, which is in northern Chhattisgarh, the Maharaja of Sarguja was infamous for having shot the largest number of tigers recorded, 1,300 according to his admission, 1,360 or something. And let's not forget, it was, and I met the family, and they told me that 1360 was the number that Maharaja Anush Singh Deo shot. But apart from that, his sons and nephews, they together shot another probably 1,000 tigers. So within the family, they shot over 2,000 tigers, and almost 80 to 90% of them were shot within their princely state, that is Sarguja. Beyond the numbers that might horrify, to me, the real story lies in the fact that the habitat was so rich in that period that it could turn out 2,000 tigers to the gun. So one can imagine how rich these habitats must have been historically for tigers and other predators. And if there were as many tigers, then what must have been the prey number been like, and so on and so forth. Uh, so and now you have none. For about 40 years, you have. I mean, there are a few here maybe, but less than 15 tigers in that entire landscape. And that 15 tigers is also a recent sort of growth. Up till 10 years ago, you barely had maybe 7 or 8 tigers in that entire maybe 10,000 square kilometer landscape. So the real story lies there, that we unfortunately tend to overlook these massive losses because we are caught up in Fana Park has now 100 tigers or 200 tigers, or Corbett has 250 tigers. As I said, that is remarkable, and kudos to the hard work that has been put in by all the stakeholders involved. But when you're looking at the broader picture, this is the problem. Same goes with elephants, for instance. There has been tremendous decline in elephant population in eastern India. Um, Take any animal, sambar, gore, leopards. Jharkhand, for instance, Jharkhand has hardly any leopard except for Palamu. The rest of the entire state has almost no leopards. And leopards, despite being such adaptable animal that you can have leopards in Sanjay Gandhi National Park in heart of Bombay, and you have leopards in Junnar in Maharashtra living in sugarcane fields. But Jharkhand, except for Palamu, has no leopards.
Why do you think that is?
Poaching, unfortunately.
Hmm. Is that still Look, so I mean, you say that they're not there anymore, but until very recently, also.
Yeah, I mean, they have died out in the last, all of this loss has been in the last 30 years.
Mm.
30. It basically, the decline of wildlife in Jharkhand starts from mid 80s onwards,
Oh
80s.
wow! So quite recent.
Yeah, very recent.
Hmm. Wow.
Raza, talking of the loss of animals, I was tangentially reminded of that piece you wrote on the Keski Forest Reserve House, which
Yeah,
also,
forest.
yeah, a rest house, which also was infused with that profound sense of loss, and loss not just of a structure, but an entire relationship with the wild. So, the question is, why do such places matter in our collective imagination? What does their disappearance tell us about the country we are becoming?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because I was thinking I might have missed something. And when you were discussing earlier about what forest means in different ways, I think one point that I thought of in my mind and then I forgot about it was that it has also played a key role in shaping the creative arts for many people. Creative art forms could be in the form of writing, it could be form of films, and especially for Jharkhand, uh, many people might not know of this, but the birth of what we call the travelogue genre in Bengali language starts from Palamu and the forest of Palamu, because there was a gentleman by the name of Sanjeev Chandra Chattopadhyay, if I'm not getting bungling the name, who wrote a novel called Palamu. He was a junior officer in the civil department in Daltonganj, and so his that travelogue about Adivasi life and what forests are like in Jharkhand, I mean in Palamu, and how Adivasis perceive them and what the relationship is. Of course, you can. I mean, I've read that text, translated version of that text. From a modern standpoint, it may seem sort of exoticizing and romanticizing and this and that. But that started the genre of travel literature in Bengali, because all the Bhadralok of Bengal read this travelogue. That inspired them to travel to these areas and see these forests and people for themselves. And then you had a slew of writers, right from uh, Tagore to Satyajit Ray, Rajchandra Chattopadhyay was there, and of course, and you had a slew of writers who came, Buddhadev Guha, and who have a who have had a huge impact on the cultural and creative psyche of especially of the Bengali arts and cultural world. They all drew their inspiration from these forests and these landscapes. and so you will find in a lot of Satyajit Ray movies, in a lot of Bengali cinema, that they are either shot, Ritwik Ghatak, Mrinal Sen, all of them, that they will have themes related to Adivasis or forest, which tend to be from what is now Jharkhand, deriving from Jharkhand. So, in that series, uh, you have Aranya Din Ratri, and where Kichki is a character in that bungalow and that entire forest. Um, and I think the loss of these places, and not just the forest, but also this loss of this utter disregard for history, built heritage. Um, as a country, it just, to me, it just saddens me a lot, and it just it just it I mean, I might sound very pessimistic, but to me it is just a proof of the fact that how much we have regressed as a society, how much we have regressed as a country, how much we have regressed as a people, and how just shallow, and yeah, we have become very shallow, and everything has to be just, um, it has to be, and there is no room for diversity anymore. It shows in not just in the way our society is functioning at the moment. It shows in how we, every railway station should look the same, every airport should look the same, every railway line should look the same. There is no scope for meter gauge, turn it into broad gauge. There is no scope for narrow gauge, turn it into broad gauge. There is no every forest bungalow should now be, should have white tiles. It should look like a cheap hotel. It should, every uh, every um, every town should have those ugly "I love whatever XYZ," put the name of the town hoardings there. Every waterfall should have ugly steel railings there. There is this new trend that I hate, which I see everywhere, is these cement concrete things that are shaped like trees, and branches that are put for scenic beauty. Like, it's just that you go to any part of the country, and there is this effort that everything should look the same. There's one, you would say, a model, and then it is replicated blindly everywhere, uh, and nobody seems to care about beauty, or I mean, one can argue, well, what is beautiful to me might not be beautiful to you, but just simplicity is no longer in fashion. Everything has to be shiny, bright, has to be jarring, and where you can take a, I sound very over, but stupid selfie and just put it on Instagram or whatever and get on with it and forget about knowing that place or understanding or spending some time. It's all pretty, yeah. I guess I'm going on a rant.
It's kind of the monoculturalization of
Yeah,
culture,
exactly.
it's
Yeah. So yeah, so from a monocultural plus silvicultural system, we are now heading toward monoculture of ideas, monoculture of society.
Mm.
Yeah, and you can add neon lighting, lasers, all sorts of new things that are coming to that thing. Raza, changing the subject a little bit, you've also written about and spoken about forgotten figures like uh, Jamal Lara, for instance. Uh, and from what you have put in the public domain, what we're getting is, the gaps in how we've written the story of India's wildlife science. Uh, why do these omissions matter for, particularly from the point of current, conservation practice?
Uh, who I'm not sure. I think for me, I when I started out looking for Jamalara and writing about her, or even the other people that I've written about, or I have at least unearthed their stories. Some might not, I haven't written them down. But for me, the idea was very simple. When I read about the kind of work that these people had put in, the kind of lives that they lived, I just thought that they should get their due. And that was pretty much it. I always felt that people who maybe I always root for the underdog. So people who were underdogs in their lifetimes and who were forgotten by history. I think that it is only fair that their stories are told and their work is recognized. So I think that to me. Of course, Jamal Ara was slightly more different because she was from Jharkhand. She was working in landscapes that I knew of. She was working in landscapes where nobody had worked after her. And that was a good 50, 60 years now. Many of these areas were under Maoist control. So it was very difficult to access these places anymore. So you wanted to get a glimpse of what life was like, what forests were like, what wildlife was like before violence came to define these places. So in Jamal Ara's case, it was slightly different, but with many other people, I just feel that we I don't know. At least I, in some way, owe it to them to tell their stories. I, I am not sure whether this comes from just stupid nostalgia and sentimentality, or there is some, some other inspiration or to this. But yeah, I just think that we need to give their due, and also because to me, I find those stories inspirational. I also feel that conservation in India, for better or for worse, has been defined by a very few figures who come from a very specific socioeconomic background. Um, so you have these, what you would call urban, privileged, elite people who defined conservation in India for the longest time. This, I mean, I am not one of those who takes umbrage to that. I mean, they've done great work and they deserve their flowers. But if you want to make conservation more relatable to a more wider set of people, you need to have, for lack of a better word, heroes who might not be from that traditional mold. For instance, Jamal Ara, a single mother from a Muslim, a single mother who abandoned by her husband, and then is not a hunter, doesn't come from a privileged family, doesn't have institutional backing, is doing all of what she's doing out of her own whatever little she can make, so like I mean, think of it. I would think of this as an inspirational story for so many women who are either already in conservation or want to get into conservation. Conservationist researchers, be they men or women, who might not have institutional backing and might always wonder, oh, what can a single person do anyway, or what can I do as a individual without any institutional backing. So you have these heroes in that sense. Similarly, I always feel that, and one may argue that I might be biased because I'm a forest officer's son, but I feel that there are a lot of forest officers back in the day who did remarkable work, but they were never acknowledged for the kind of work they put in. So if you can put out those stories, maybe, and I might be, you know, be naively hopeful in this, but I do believe that maybe there might be five forest officers from the current crop who might read these stories and get really inspired, and they might do something. So similarly, there are these stories of daily wage trackers and who have done remarkable jobs, or who come from marginalized figures. They might be Dalits, they might be Adivasis. Their stories, uh, they might hopefully inspire people who maybe come from a similar socioeconomic background, maybe a village boy or a girl who thinks कि ओ ये conservation वगैरह और ये सब जंगल जानवर ये तो मतलब शहर के लोग करते हैं, this is city वालों का, and what recognition or what contribution can I make so then if you have heroes or inspirational stories who are people who come from similar socioeconomic backgrounds who maybe in some ways broader in a broader sense face similar challenges as they might be facing as a community, as a village, as an individual, and how they navigated those challenges. So these might serve as yeah, it might help to broaden the conservation uh, scenario from a select urban few to a more representative sort of it will make it more representative. Hopefully, that is one of the hopes.
Yeah, I mean, I know you caveated that with a lot of you might be naive and you might be this, that, and the other. But frankly, I mean, I thought that telling the stories of people like Jamal Lara, etc., is a good way to restore people like that to history, not as footnotes to conservation or to development, but as central characters whose lives actually shape these landscapes. So, yeah, very glad you did that, Arti.
Yeah,
Mute, unmute.
Gosh, I'm doing this a lot today.
Yeah.
Okay, so that into the conversation, obviously. um, so I want to take you back, Raza, to the whole, your answer to the question about the Ketki, the forest rest house, and how those things are being kind of swapped out one for another. It kind of reminds me about how currently we have swapped out the Asiatic cheetah for the African cheetah, and I know that there has been history before of the African lion being introduced as well. And so, my question, I think, to you in this whole monoculturalization or this kind of generalization of everything, anything is swappable with anything else, and it's one is as good as the other kind of mentality. What do the people whose identity is so tied to a landscape or so tied to a dispensation of even a forest, for example, like it may be a part of a forest that defines them or whatever, that's so particular, that is so special, or specialized, what do such people have to offer us in this world that is changing so fast, that is becoming like mass produced? It's like, I don't know, I'm thinking this question as I'm speaking, so bear with me. It's like river exchange is, yeah, you can river linkaging, where you can change one river to another, you can connect another to another, and it's just water. The thinking seems to be so small or narrowly focused, versus these people whose identity is so specialized, where they're seeing the value of a particular ecosystem or part of an ecosystem, a very local geography, for example, right? What kind of offer, what do they have to offer us? That heterogeneity of even uh, a way of seeing, a way of living, a way of praying. What do they have to offer us in this world of one size fits all almost? Sorry, did I make sense?
No, you absolutely did. I think you in some ways you answered it yourself in that question. That they offer you an alternative vision. They offer you heterogeneity. They offer you of uh, a way of life uh, that was and that could have been, and maybe in some ways it still can be, if the powers that be would listen to it. In all of this, what my concern is that, unfortunately, and this is something that I have noticed, and it might be a subjective opinion, and others might disagree with it, but at least in areas that I know closely or have observed for a very long time, And in all my travels, and I do travel quite a bit, at least that I won't caveat. Um, so, uh, so I see that the people who, in many ways, I would have banged upon as the last custodians, and in many places, I'm talking of the Adivasis. They are also slowly, either through coercion or through just the situation being made so in this world, or just the pace of life, this mobile phone, the internet, this, that, whatever connectivity, they are just uh, you know becoming they are abandoning a lot of those value systems themselves. It reminds me of an excellent book by and I would recommend it as a read for anybody who's listening to it, to this discussion. Is I might be sort of slightly inaccurate with my title name, but it is, if I remember correctly, the name of the book is Living Among the Dead, or Living Without the Dead. And it is written by an anthropologist by the name of Peter Witebetsky. So if I've got the title slightly wrong, with the author, you'll get the right title. It basically is the story of set in southern Orissa among the Sauras, who are an Adivasi tribe, and he spends about 30 years in that landscape, studying them continuously. And to his huge surprise and disappointment and disillusionment in some ways, he notices that in the generation that he last studied, this is in the 90s, late 90s, the newer generation just completely voluntarily abandons the old faith. They had a huge, Sauras had a huge thing for shamanism was a huge part of their cultural life. So communicating with the ancestral spirits, with the dead, and so on and so forth, it was a huge part of their faith system. And suddenly, and of course, there are many other things as well. And suddenly, he noticed that the younger generation just thought that uh, they either converted to Christianity, or they converted to, I mean, basically adopted Hindu, mainstream Hindu lifestyle, or Christianity. And the entire Adivasi cosmos and that system just faded away in his own lifetime within 30 years during his study period. Um, and I see shades of that happening elsewhere as well, at differing paces, but happening elsewhere as well. And I mean, I don't blame them at all. Because um, at the end of the day, I guess for most of us, what is the saying? Ki when in Rome, do as the Romans do, or something. You basically, at the end of the day, if the general country, the powers that decide, make all the decisions, they have envisioned a particular way of life and a particular future for the country. Unfortunately, most of the people eventually fall in line.
Mm.
And I see that happening in most of these areas as well. Of course, there are people and there are communities that still hold out, but and I mean, it might be a pessimistic thing to say, but I don't see. I mean, unless something remarkably miraculous happens, I don't see them holding out for too long.
As a student of history, do you see a way forward where economic aspirations and ecological intelligence can coexist?
I think it can. I think, and even this trend that I'm talking about, even this in some ways maybe can be reversed, or if not reversed, it can be halted. And in all of that, the answer to that, I think, is history. Because people, and this is across the board, for me, for you, for the Adivasi kid in Saranda or Palamu, for boy or girl in Hazaribagh, or somebody in Bangalore or Bombay. we don't know where we came from, what our roots are, what we were like as a people back in the day. And because we don't know what we were like, you only value what you know, and I mean, the sense of loss only comes if you know what you've lost. If you don't know what you've lost, you wouldn't care anyway. So, uh, and if only when you realize what you've lost, that then you make an effort to, oh, I don't want to lose that, or to bring back or to undo that loss. And that is where history comes in. That is where stories come in. That is where a Jamal Ara comes in. That is where the stories that I was told as a child come in, because they tell you about time, about a culture, about people, and how things were. And when you then know, oh, this is what my forefathers were like, or this is how we used to live as a people, and then you compare it with where you are right now, and then you are in a better position to make a call of whether where you are is better. Yeah, there are, at least if not all, certain things about the past, or certain things about your past cultural lives, that you want to retain, and you want to that they were good things that you want to carry forward. So that is where history comes in, and that is where I think, in some very insignificant way, I try to make a contribution, that I at least can bring back those stories and tell it to people. And then of course it's I've put it out in the world, and then it is up to people on how they what they make of it. But at least I feel that I would have done my part. But of course I can only, I mean, I'm just a blip. There are so many stories, there are so many people around, there are so many landscapes to cover. So if there can be other people who can do something similar as well, talk about the past, talk to your elders, talk to, go to landscapes, read old books, read anthropological accounts, and maybe then maybe some things might change. And that is where that maybe we might achieve that balance as well, where we do, I mean, of course, when I talk of all this past, I know that I don't want to romanticize certain aspects of the past, the poverty, the destitution, the how difficult it was to sometimes get the basic essentials of life, the health, the position of women in many societies. I mean, as romantic as all of this might sound, in most societies, women are, at least in terms of education, in terms of general access to the outside world, better off than they were 100 years ago. So I understand, Ki, what are the things from the past that you need to sort of discard, and what are the things that you need to maybe carry forward. And when you talk of economic development and uh, that balance will probably only come if you have that knowledge of what was there in the past, what to keep, and what are the new things that you want to bring in, and then harmonize the two.
It's happening again, Prem, where our guests are ahead of us by a step.
Yeah.
So, Raza, that was going to be our question coming up, actually, storytelling as ecology, and as how important it is to ecology. But I'll just make one comment to something that you just said about how important history is in this case. When I was writing about Faraka, and I was writing about the story of the Ganga changing courses, etc., I had come across, um, written by Abul Fazl, he had recorded at that time a kind of rice which keeps its head of grain above water as the flood water rises. And just last week, 10 days ago, I happened to be in a place where I had gone for something completely different, where I saw people who had suffered badly in storm surges and stuff like that, with Green Revolution grain, and had also by chance planted heirloom old grain, which was the one that came right back after during the storm surge also, nothing happened to it, and then they have started now replanting and propagating that, and again, wouldn't have happened if they didn't know that there was something like this before, right? So it's so important to have, and like, you document the history, because oral history can be again lost, right? If so, one of the big things that I actually had that has been troubling me is what happens to all this history when we homogenize the population, either through ideology or through migration, for example, where people leave their land and then they're completely out of fish out of water types in other places, and then they have to adopt whatever it takes to survive there. Then what happens to those place specific cultural and ecological and survival aspects, right? And you said it so well, that unless you know where you came from and what survival techniques or even thriving techniques you employed at that time, or your ancestors did, you would not be able to resurrect or get that back. So important. But I'm going to turn it over to Prem to ask the storytelling question, or to take that forward in that vein, if that's what he wants, or some other vein.
No, not really. I mean, I would have asked about the storytelling thing, but like you just pointed out, Raza kind of just decided that, okay, you guys are going to ask about this, I might as well say it. And also something that you said at the beginning, that with our guests, we end up asking about 30% of what we meant to ask. And I was suddenly looking at the clock and realizing that we've kept Raza here for an hour and 45 minutes. So maybe Aarti, take it home.
No, you take it home today.
Okay. Yeah, we kind of take it in turns to. Hey, Raza, since we talked about storytelling, we talked about all of those things. Is there a story from, say, your ongoing fieldwork or from the archives that you carry with you as a sort of reminder of why this work is still worth doing?
There are many.
Tell us lots.
I think yeah. I'm trying to think which one is one that I want to tell. Okay, maybe. I mean, it isn't sort of, I don't know in which bracket does this fall, but it was something that I was very how just people and stories connect, is that I have been translating this book written in Urdu by old forest officer by the name of Khan Bahadur Hakimuddin. Now, why this book is very special is that he, unlike others, first of all, he's an Indian officer writing this book. He joined the Forest Department 1911, if I remember correctly, or 1911. He is not a senior officer. He joins the department at the rank of a deputy range officer. That is just a rank above the forest guard. And then he serves the department and goes on to become a DFO and retires in 1947. And then he straddles between the partition happens, but and it was through the book that I found out, and then I talked to some of the elders as well and realized that for the first few years, people moved very fluidly. So he had a home in Karachi as well. He had a home in Agra as well, and he used to move between the two places, 6 months there, 6 months here, and then eventually. But he loved the forest too much, and he joined in those days zamindari was still around. He joined a zamindari in what is now Dudhwa Tiger Reserve, that area, which he had served earlier during his department days, and he became a manager, and that is when he wrote what in Urdu is known as Sawane Hayat, that is his memoirs. And so that is one, his background. But what makes it so unlike all the books that I have read, it isn't written by a white officer, it isn't written by a princely state Raja or Skayan, it isn't written by that a privileged person. And second, it's written by an Indian officer who is from a junior rank, so you're looking at the British system from bottom up. And third is that it is just the most hilarious book in parts that I've ever read. Like I can't remember the last time I've read a book and laughed as much as I did reading it. because it feels like he's like one of these, very mazedar old uncles who's telling his stories in the most funny way, and he's just penned it down. It seems like he jumps out of the pages and he's speaking to you. And of course, it because it's written in he's from Awadh, so it's written in a very typical Awadhi style of Urdu. And because my parents and my both my maternal and paternal side originate from this area, and because as a child I used to every year come spend 10 days during Muharram in my village, so I'm very conversant with the dialect and the cultural markers and so on and so forth. So I enjoyed it even more. But of all of that, there is one particular episode that I particularly enjoyed is that when he describes the time when he has joined the forest department as a deputy range officer, and he has been sent to a small forest chowki called Chosla. And there he lives with he's learning the silvicultural systems and this and that, and he has his two pet peeves. Are one is that he hates the fact that he has to eat chawal and aloo and every day, and he gets bored, so he's always on the lookout to get some meat, either as especially jungle fowls. He's very fond of that. And the second is that he has the second pet peeve is that he hates night jars, because he says ki they keep doing chuk 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 throughout the night. They're called chapka churiya, and he can't get sleep. So his writing is of रात भर छपका चुड़ियाओं ने मुझे सोने नहीं दिया, ऐसे करके he writes. So and then he has a best friend who in his word is his bodyguard, and he always his name is Dhangaliya, and he's a coolie, and he is one-eyed. So he always, whenever he writes about that character, he always gives the full title. So and he's great friends with him, and then he talks of his conversations and all of this, and there are two. I mean, he's young in those days, and there are two, in his words, बुड्ढे तक क्या नाम है forest guards who live there, who are training him in the basics of silviculture and his interaction with them, and how he wants to work hard. He's a young man, and these oldies, they tell him ki, we are about to retire, you do your hard work, we don't want to do any more hard work, and we have had enough of this life. So it's all great fun. And then there's this particular episode which, and all these stories would never come across in an account written by a British guy. So he says that there is a particular range officer his range officer who comes down on a horse. There were no vehicles back in the day, and he comes with his orderly, and that orderly, and then वो orderly जो है अर्दली वो he tells him कि sir बहुत दिन से I've been eating just dal aloo, so why not get some meat. So he says ठीक है whatever, so go shoot a cheetal, and so he goes and shoots a cheetal for the pot, and he distributes it to everybody. Then there's a big debate about who will get the head, and the old forest guard is saying ki, I'm going to retire, give me the head, I'll at least decorate the antlers in my house or whatever. And eventually it so happens that the range officer gets the thigh, and I think he gets the head eventually or something, and then the forest guard take the skin. But and so he gives it to his orderly, and that orderly जो है वो the range officer goes, and he notices, he says कि range officer when he came, I found it very odd because he was dressed like a British officer, and for whatever God knows reason, he was speaking in a broken Urdu, misl अंग्रेजों के, like a British officer. So he said कि he was speaking something like कि तुम क्या करने को मांगता है, ऐसे ओ damn fool ये वो. So he found it all very odd, and the way he was dressed. So anyway, so the range officer goes, and then the orderly who has on a bamboo pole, he has the cheetal ka leg and the head on either end, and he marches off, and he gives the choicest galiyan expletives to the to somebody named Goan Sahab. So this Hakimuddin asks that gentleman ki, yeah, who is this Goan Sahab, and why is he being abused by this orderly? So everybody starts laughing and they say कि अरे go on Sahab is our range officer. He because of the fact that he dresses like an Angrez and then he cannot behave like an Angrez and deliberately speaks this broken Hindi English sort of a mishmash. Uh, and when he is angry, तो he said कि जब अंग्रेज गुस्सा होता है तो अंग्रेज जो है वो go on damn fool जैसे लफ्जों का बहुत इस्तेमाल करता है. तो हमारे जो ये नकली अंग्रेज हैं, this phony Britisher that we have here, he also keeps, whenever he finds his junior staff or the laborers, he'll take his the baton and he will just whip it. I mean, he wouldn't strike anybody, he would just whip it in the air and keep shouting, go on damn fool, jaldi karo ye, whatever. So then everybody had nicknamed him Go On Sahab, and everybody used to make fun of him and abuse him or whatever. So then he asked कि ये की नकल किसकी करते हैं? He said कि अरे there is an forest officer, our DFO, Kar Sahab. So he is the one whose mimicry जो है वो ये करते हैं. And he said कि does he behave this way in front of Kar Sahab as well? So he said the sentence is कि कार जो है बहुत बददिमाग है, के सामने ऐसा करें तो कच्चा चबा जाए इनको. Then they tell a story कि what happened was कि once he was, ये कहने हमारे नकली गोवन साहब जो हैं वो एक बार लेबरर्स रोड बना रहे थे फॉरेस्ट की, और वो खड़े होके जो है वो अपनी टोपी ओपी लगा के और रुमाल जो है अपना खोस के अंग्रेजों, एंड ही वाज अपनी बेंच चमका रहे थे. तो ही वाज डूइंग दिस अपने उसके साथ, and he was shouting go on damn fool ye wo, and suddenly Kar Sahab, the DFO, actually comes on his horse and without intimating him, and he sees that the DFO is coming, so immediately he throws off his robe and he throws off his kya naam hai, the sola topi that he had kept, and hides it in the jhadi, and takes his rumal and puts it around his belt like a junior staff must. And by the time Kar Sahab comes, he just starts speaking in normal Urdu, normal Hindi कि अरे देखो कार साहब आ गया, तुम लोग मेहनत नहीं करते हो, जल्दी जल्दी रोड बना, कैसे काम चले. तो and then उसके कार साहब went, and then as soon as he was gone, he again took out his वही बात है टोपी and robe and started shouting, "Go on, damn fool!" That was my introduction to this, and eventually I loved that book so much and that story. So what I have done is I want to go and see every place that he has mentioned. So eventually I managed to track down that forest chowki. And I went to that forest chowki. It is exactly 120 years later, almost exactly the same. I could make out which room he lived in, the tree that he talked about. Of course, he says that there are just 3-4 hutments there, which are temporarily occupied by pahadis who come during the summers, and then during the winters, and during the summers they go back up. And now it's a big village around, but still there's lots of wildlife. It's bang next to Corbett, that area. So that is one aspect of it, and that is how I'd heard of Kar Sahab. The other thing that I always wanted to do was that I've been fascinated by, morbidly maybe, with graves and memorials in the forest. So I was just looking around for just searching, and I mean there are many stories I can tell you about that as well, and we can do another 5 hours of that. But so I was going through this old journal called Chaukidar. It's published, I don't know if it's still published, but it was published by the British Association for Cemeteries in South Asia, Buxa. And there, remarkably, I found somebody had written a note in the 1980s saying that so and so is looking for the grave of one Mr. T. Carr, who died who was a DFO and who died in Senapani, and he committed suicide apparently. So he shot himself in Forest Bungalow, Senapani, where I have been. I mean, much before I knew all of this. And he is buried somewhere in the small town of Tanakpur. And if anybody knows about that grave. So then I was like, oh, and then it hit me that it is the same Kar Sahab whose stories I had read in Hakimuddin's book. So then I managed to ask around. Some from that note, it said he's buried. We are told next to a forest lodge in a garden. And like the only forest lodge, maybe probably the forest rest house. But Tanakpur had an old forest bungalow. So then I went there, and we eventually managed to locate the grave. And the Chowkidar, and Chowkidars are another fascinating subject. I love bungalow Chowkidars. And so he was a third generation bungalow Chowkidar. His grandfather, his father, and he. And then he said, ki, oh yes, and then he said, ki, yeah, he showed us the grave. It was all broken, and I mean, it was overrun by weeds and stuff. And then we cleared that grave, and he told me that in the last 50 years, this is the first time somebody who's outsider had come to inquire about his grave. And then he explained what I saw was a complete mess. And he said, when I was a child, this used to be a beautiful garden. There used to be crosses here. There were the grave rested around in the middle of a rose sort of garden, and there were fruit bearing trees all around. And then it all sort of came together, and then I've just written to the family, and hopefully now they'll come down, and they'll reconnect with this grave they were trying to find. So I mean, and I've done that for, so I don't know, it's just stupid sentimentality, I guess. But what I found was interesting was, in some strange way, it really inspired a lot of the forest staff. So now they are all very, this entire affair, it really intrigued them and interested them, that now throughout the forest division, whenever anybody finds some old structure, some old building, something, they'll send me photos. They'll ask the elder people in that area about that place, about what is the story behind and what is the history behind that work. So in that sense, I have managed to generate some sense of curiosity and interest among a number of forest department staff people there, who now go on and try to find out their own little histories in areas that they work.
Beautiful. And yeah, Arti, take it home.
You were supposed to do that. But you
Yeah,
know
I did.
what struck me though, Prem, and I think you'll agree. So Raza, this whole series, we started it in March, these podcasts, and we kind of had two parallel tracks running in these podcasts. One was a very environment focused, lots of what's happening in India, etc., so commentary on that, but also about how to tell stories which are not spot stories where you run and take whatever and come out and how do you tell long term stories, how do you sustain the storytelling, how do you start building meaning then through sustained storytelling. And I always wanted to have you on our podcast just because of your history and your work. But given the fact that it's so turned out that you are closing out our first season, I think is so perfect because you are essentially telling everyone how important both those tracks are in order to understand what's going on in this world, right? You need to understand history, you need to understand, spend the cycles doing or go to those places, see what's happening, talk to those people, walk back the stories in time and see what happened there, why did this happen. So that's the storytelling part, but in through all of that you are documenting the history of our forests, of our landscapes in that region, which is so important, which is so little in mainstream media or in any sense in our psyche, etc. So I think completely serendipitously, it has worked out really well to have you on this episode. And I'm just so kicked. And thank you for taking the time. And I know that I hounded you a bit. Sorry about that.
Not
But thank you so much for just so beautifully bringing these two very important aspects of information, knowledge, wisdom, etc., bringing it together and telling us why we need to know history and why landscapes matter and the history of our landscapes. Thank you so much for doing this. And Prem, I'll give you one more word. I know you're itching to say something, so say it.
No. Raza, somewhere in there, when he was recounting the story, said, I have enough stories for another 5 hours. And I quickly made a note of that, saying, okay, we're bringing you back next season for more stories. But again, like Karthi said, thanks a bunch, Raza. This was, yeah, like she said, it was serendipitous. It just so happened that you became the final guest of this particular season, this particular year. But just perfect. So thank you very much
Thank
for
you so
that.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I'm so glad I could do this.
Great. And have a happy end of the year. And
Thank
good
you.
luck with the book. We're looking forward to it. And
Yeah.
also the other book that you were writing on Palamu,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
I hope to finish it this year.
It's going to be a gem. We're looking forward to it. Everything you write is a gem. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So, what do you make of that, Prem?
Well, a whole lot of things. I mean, obviously, the things that he spoke about, the stories that he told, and all of that. But I was also thinking, we go into each of these uh, episodes, each of these recording sessions, with this large, long Google Doc with questions, possible themes, follow ups, uh, tangential questions, and all of that. And we end up asking almost none of that because our guests keep taking the conversations in different directions. And honestly, I mean, while we were waiting for this thing to upload and just having that sideline conversation, I was just looking through that doc and I realized that letting Raza take the conversation wherever he wanted actually taught me a lot more than if he had answered the questions that we had thought of.
Totally.
That is one. Also that sideline conversation, which unfortunately our listeners won't get. I love that point he made about how the British during the Empire days, uh, the local administrators took so much pains to document every single thing, the
Yeah.
ecology, the
Yeah.
lifestyles, all of
Yeah.
that, uh, and that too working with languages that they were not even familiar with,
Yeah.
and they left such a trove of information, insight, and all of that. And today's IAS officers feel no need for that, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
you're thinking 50 years ahead, we will still be looking at the British histories, but not necessarily at what has
Yeah.
come after.
I think there's a lot to be said for detailed documentation of things that you don't necessarily even see uh, as important storytelling points. For
Yeah.
example, the British even they have recorded, for that matter, even Ibn Battuta has recorded the price of rice, the
Yes.
price of a slave girl, the price of everything in Bengal versus wherever he went, right? So there's at least some kind of a baseline, some kind of a thing to compare that time in history, different places. Um, where do we, I mean, I guess as storytellers, we should also maybe our notes. I don't know. I'm terrible at keeping such notes. It's all, I know I'm uh, guilty of
I
not doing it.
keep notes, but one of the things that Raza and some of the earlier guests put me in mind of is that I need to be more systematic with my notes. Uh, I make notes when something strikes me, but it has to actually intrude on my thoughts, right? As opposed to consciously developing that habit of just keep making notes of things, no matter how trivial, because it accumulates and then suddenly insights start to come from that.
True, but also the notes themselves. What in our time, uh, the time that we're living in, I make so many photographs which are almost memory aids,
Yeah.
right? What after me? I mean, nobody knows where these things are, and they're all probably going to be in hard drives, which will at some point become obsolete. Nobody will know how to access them. It's going to be lost to history.
Yeah.
Not that I'm doing any important work, but I'm saying that kind of stuff is going to all be lost to history. And unless we have a way of making sense of it and putting it out there,
Yeah.
so that somebody in the future can search and find what they might
But
need.
that's the thing, right? I mean, one of the reasons why my note taking is so sporadic, even though I do it's kind of hit or miss, is this thought that, look, I mean, who's going to be interested? What does this
Yep.
mean, right? But
Yep.
that's it. That's the other thing from Raza. uh, it's not who's going to be interested. It is like, okay, there is this, and then there is something that somebody else has done, and so on and on and on. And then suddenly things start to come together, things start to build. I mean,
Hmm.
he was talking about the various places he found information from, right? It was never one source that gave everything. So,
Yeah.
yeah, all of that.
No,
What did you make
fascinating. I
of
think
it?
in a time when, especially in a time when data and information is so questionable
Yep.
and fraught,
Yep.
what is the value? What is the call of the hour for us, people like us? What do we really need to do at this point? Um, and what can we base our own things on? What can be trusted? I don't know. I've got so many questions in my head after this conversation, really.
Yeah. That's that's been a common theme across pretty much all the episodes we've done. Left us with a lot of insight, but also a lot of questions and notes about, okay, must bring this guy back, must
Yeah,
bring this person back, must ask about this, must ask about that. And
yeah,
I was looking at my notebook, and it's packed with, okay, follow up this.
yeah. Even me, I had so many notes for
Yeah,
just through this conversation, and also I think I must say a huge thank you to you, Prem, for the show notes that you do. Because looking back on this season, even if one were to just read the show notes, there would
yeah.
be enough and more for them to keep them busy for many months.
And
So,
talking of many months, we did mention at the start that this is the final episode, right, of this season. So maybe we need to tell our viewers when we'll be back, what our plans are for next year. You want to take that?
so we started this season in March, and we're finishing it out in December. And between Prem and I and discussions, we think that is going to be our way forward. Fortnightly from March till December. But equally, we are looking for people who might be interested in sponsoring us or funding this kind of endeavor, where we talk to people who are so steeped, like you heard Raza today, so steeped in such an important part of our history making, that if there is some way that we can bring, even within a kind of listenable to our window, uh, some of what his experiences are to you, and if you find that valuable, to be able to make it worth, if you find it worth your while, to make it possible for us to keep doing something like this. So we are going to be looking for funding going forward for the next season, now that we have this one season and 20 episodes under our belt.
Yeah.
And thank you to the 35,000 plus people who have subscribed to From the Marginlands. It's something that's way beyond anything that we expected.
Yeah.
So,
And the other thing about what Aarti just said about needing sponsorships is that for season two, one of the things that obviously we'll have guests. Some of them will be repeat guests because, as we keep saying, there is so much that these people know, and there is just so much that you can bring out in an hour and a half that we have. So some of these guests will be repeats, some will be new to you. But the other thing that we want to do is also take you on field trips, maybe vicariously most of the time, but also do in person meet and thing do ask me anything's online. But most importantly, field trips to some of these places that we're talking about, so that you can see what we're talking about. And that takes money. We're both freelancers, which basically means we both uh,
we're paupers.
yeah, exactly. So yeah.
And
uh,
yeah, and we've done this on our own dime this whole season. it's been out of pocket for us, and
Yeah.
we've enjoyed it and we've learned tremendously. But keep it sustainable. We will be looking to um, maybe open this up for subscriptions as well, where we will have uh, part of it, of course, available to people who are not able to afford a subscription, which is totally fine, but uh, also then give something that is above and beyond and a little bit extra to our subscribers. So there are different models that we are exploring. We will be back with all of that in the new year in March, and we hope that you guys will stick around with us until then. And thank you so much once again for being part of this journey from the Marginlands.
Thank you all, and greetings of the festive season. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Hope that 2026 is kind to you and to all in your circle. We'll see you back in March.
Take care.
Bye bye.